What is the best question you've ever heard a child ask? My 5-year-old son asks me this kind of stuff all of the time. It's amazing to watch their brains grow and their reasoning skills develop. Last week he asked me why flies think gross stuff smells good and good stuff smells gross. I'm thinking, okay, how do I explain this at a kiddie level when he came up with his own hypothesis? He figured, their lungs are upside down. I had to call my wife to tell her. Why are you making me get in the van? Double quote. Why is hate more important than love? I can love my mom and love cookies, but it's not the same love. But if I say I hate broccoli, everyone gets mad saying it's a bad word. Why isn't love a super good word if hate is super bad? Words from the 6-year-old I Babysit. My 4-year-old daughter came to the conclusion that Santa Claus moonlights as a pirate 364 days of year. She figured they both have beards. They wear the same boots and belt. And both say yo ho ho. Merry Christmas. I thought that was pretty outstanding for a little kid. Once, as I was leaving work, I passed a young boy and his mother in line for the cash register. The little boy looked up at his mum and said, "Mummy, what is this?" She replied, "It's a line, sweetie." The kid then looked around, wide-eyed, and shouted, "Oh my god, I'm in a line." Double quote. That reminds me of the time my mom took my sister and me to Disney World. I was about 12 and my sister was only 3. We were waiting in line for my sister to meet the princesses. It was one of those zigzag lines through the ropes. She didn't seem to grasp the concept of waiting in line and kept saying, "But they're right there. Why don't we just walk over there?" My mom tried to explain that we have to wait for the other people to get up there first, and she said, "Then why don't they just walk over there?" Double quote. I saw a kid many years ago, probably back in 1985 to 1989, when I lived in DC, at the Vietnam Memorial, tugging on his Vietnam veteran dad's one remaining arm and looking at the wall. "Dad, how come there's so many names?" Double quote. This wasn't a question, but one of the most poignant statements I've ever heard uttered was from my then 5-year-old cousin when my grandfather died in the early 90s. My aunt was in hysterics. He died in a car accident at a relatively young age, and she was torn up at the funeral. When she said, "Why would God do this?" my cousin, her daughter, replied, "I don't know, Mommy. I don't think he did do it. It just happened. But I'm still here. And I love you." And she hugged her. I was sitting next to them and lost it. As a camp counselor, I had a cabin of 7 and 8-year-olds for 3 days and 2 nights. On the last day, I'm sitting next to one of the kids and he asks me, "Nobody, are your parents dead?" Double quote. I respond, "No." "Why do you ask?" Double quote. He says, "I'd be very sad if my parents were dead. I'm glad yours aren't either. Let's go swimming." Double quote. I just sat there for 30 seconds and thought about it. After they left that day, I called my parents and told them I love them. Kids, man. Fucking crazy bastards. Not insightful. More WTF. Shopping at our local supermarket. My 3-year-old, at the time, looks around and suddenly asks, at the only volume he knows, 11. "Daddy, are these all those stupid people?" Double quote. My niece, while I escorted her to a public restroom, folklore. "Do you hear that noise? That's me pooping. Do you smell that? Sometimes my poops smell. You wouldn't want to live in a butt, would you? There's just a lot of poop and I don't think you would like that." All while giggling like a creeper. This year at Christmas, my aunt wrapped my 3-year-old cousin's present 3 separate times to bug her. After unwrapping the first 2 layers, she looked up outside, "Is this really necessary?" Double quote. I love when kids make adult comments like that. My cousin was in his booster seat in the back of the car. My nana got into the seat in front of him. He sighed and went, "Nana, your hair's in a right state." You need to get another perm. We were also in the car once driving past a car sales place that had closed down. And he says, Lilina, did you know that garage went bankrupt? It's under new ownership. I know he was probably just repeating what his dad had told him. But still pretty funny hearing that coming from a kid in a booster seat. About 2 days ago, I went to the park to go get some sun and exercise. There is a big pyramid of ropes. It's actually quite cool. And all of the children were playing on it. When all of a sudden I hear a kid ask, why are we climbing this? I just laughed to myself, admitting that it is pretty silly to think that we just put some ropes up for no reason but to climb up and then climb down. Kids are probably the smartest of us all. They haven't been tainted by society just yet. My son. Hey dad. When are you gonna die? Me. I don't know. Hopefully not for a long time. My son. Oh. Well, when you and mom die I want new parents. Me. You what? My son. I love you guys. But I need parents. I'm not old enough to use a stove. Very pragmatic for a 4-year-old. I was explaining to my then 5-year-old daughter why we separate recyclables from the trash. I told her that the aluminum cans were going to a place where the metal would be melted and made into something useful. She didn't even pause. You mean a robot? Proud father-daughter moment. Edit. Another one, we were talking about people speaking different languages. For some reason. And I told her that she would eventually study a foreign language in school. She was very resistant to the idea. And kept saying she didn't want to. Then she asked something profound and naive at the same time. Do I have to learn a foreign language? Can't I learn Spanish? Double quote. One more. On seeing her baby brother in the bath, first time seeing a penis. I'm worried. Should his bottom be sticking out like that? Double quote. I worked at a restaurant and pretty much babysat my manager's 8-year-old during work. I have large breasts. One day, I catch her staring at them with this horrified look on her face. And she asks me, will mine get that big someday? Double quote. She's Chinese. And her mother was pretty flat-chested. So I chuckled and said probably not. She suddenly looked very relieved and said good cause they're really gross. I would also accidentally bonk her in the head with them while working. And she'd say stop hitting me with your fat bags. She's going to be an asshole when she grows up. I was driving along with my daughter. And she was looking at a little $0.99 IKEA plush crocodile. Which for some reason had red polka dots on it. She asked why the crocodile had red dots on him. And without skipping a beat, I said that it was so that he could hide in the raspberry bushes. I kid you not. She thought about it for 20 or 30 seconds. And then said, but crocodile live in rivers. She was 3 years old. Proudest moment ever. My dad and I were walking a trail in a mountain park that didn't have much people walking around. And it was pretty warm outside, so we decided to take our shirts off. Lo and behold, a little family comes walking our way. A little girl turns to her mom, points to my father and asks out loud, Mommy, why is that man naked? Double quote. My sister, when she was about 3, refused to eat her fish sticks. My mom told her she wasn't allowed to leave the dinner table until she ate some. Why? My sister asked. Because fish is brain food. My mom replied. Pause. Then my sister says, if fish is brain food, how come it was dumb enough to get caught? Double quote. My sister. She was 5 at the time. Kind of a question that she answered herself. But still. When are you going to get married? You can marry whoever you want, right? Except for my friends. That would be silly. Because they're my friends. And really little. And you really couldn't marry me. I'm little. And I'm your sister. That would be really silly. Like a duck. With worms on its head. Commence giggling. I wasn't there. In fact, I'm not sure I even existed at the time, but my mom has an oft repeated story about my older brother when he was very small. They were out driving somewhere when he suddenly asks, did someone move our house while we were gone? Double quote. After taking a moment to process this, Mom says, no. Of course not. Double quote. To which my brother replies, why not? Double quote. I once heard a kid ask his mom, where does a circle end? She replied, I guess it doesn't really end, and the kid said back to her, well then he'll love you till the end of the circle. I thought it was beautiful, however the mother was too busy reading some tabloid and didn't even acknowledge the kid. Dumb bitch stifling brilliance. My high school physics teacher brought his son into work one day. While we were working on magnets, one of the girls in my class decided to show him the magnets and said, look. Magic. The kid just looks up and goes, that's electromagnetism. You idiot. Double quote. I was working on a family tree that went back a few generations. My 5 and 3-year-old walked into my home office and asked what I was doing, and I started to explain what the boxes meant and started describing their relationships to the top of the tree when they asked if we could meet them. And I told them we couldn't. My 5-year-old asked if it was because they were dead. And I told them yes. He then started pointing to another box in the tree and asked if they were dead too. And I told him yes. Then he asked the question I feared the most. Am I going to die? I told him yes. Someday. He said. But Dad, I don't want to die. My 3-year-old girl chiming in. I don't want to die too. I explained that everything that lives also dies. Including me. And their mother. He then asked, can we watch a YouTube video on not dying? Or how to come back to life? We all pretty much teared up. We all hugged and cried. When their mother came upstairs to see what was going on, my 3-year-old girl told her, daddy says we're all going to die. You. Me. My best friend. Everybody. My wife wasn't too pleased with me that night. I was coaching 5-year-old soccer outside and it started to rain and the kids were being a bit rowdy and taking forever to settle down when one of them exclaimed, oh man. Why is it raining? Because I thought he was asking it to be a smartass, I launched into an explanation of water vapor and clouds. To my darndest surprise they shut up, sat there and listened to me and asked intelligent question for the next 10 minutes. Now during water break time they come up with questions and I answer them the best I can. My little brother asked why we exist. I tried to explain how we need to continue to survive and stuff to him. He said, I know that. But we are so small. The Earth is so much bigger than us. And there are things in the universe that are bigger than Earth. It's like it doesn't matter if we even exist. I just stared at him in a stunned silence. I had never expected such an articulate phrase to come out of my dyslexic little brother's mouth. That same year I bought him a telescope and helped him look at the stars. Then after a week we went back to him being incredibly annoying and me hating him. Not a question I heard. But one my parents reminded me that I asked. When I was around 8 or so I was just starting to grasp racism. It was a really weird concept to me because the school I went to was predominantly Spanish and black. So judging someone by the color of their skin just seemed odd. My mom's side of the family is not the most tolerant. So in typical little kid form I was really worried about it. I go, Mom, what do we tell Grandpa if I marry a black man? She looks at me and says, don't worry about it. If the time comes and we need to, he'll get over it. So I sit there thinking really hard and then ask my next question. Hey Mom, what do we tell him if I marry a woman? My mom, without even missing a beat, we'll tell him you married a black man. Double quote. When I was about 9, we were at dinner and my older brother, 12, was describing a study about cell phone radiation and its effects on rat brains. My brother loved science. And he was all worked up about this study. He probably did 10 minutes on it. He was very convinced that everyone was going to get brain cancer. When he was done, my younger brother, then 5, said, why would rats even need to use cell phones? Double quote. My nephew, 2 years old. We heard a sound come from his room while he was supposed to be in bed. And went to check on him. He'd managed to somehow make the talcum powder bottle explode all over him and the room. He tried to pretend nothing had happened. So we put him in front of the mirror. First words. Oh. Then we ask, why did you do that? Dot. His response? Because I'm sorry? Double quote. Best answer ever. More of a statement than a question. But epic nonetheless. And an answer we could all use. I've posted this in another thread. And it got a pretty good response. I was raised Catholic but I'm agnostic now. My husband and I have raised our daughter with little to no religious education. My father sent my daughter a book about the Easter story one year. And I read it to her. When it got to the part about him raising from the dead, her eyes got huge and she asked me, Mom, is Jesus a zombie? She had spent the weeks leading up to that Easter watching my husband play Resident Evil 5. And he'd explained to her zombie lore. A buddy of mine has a birth defect and was born without his left hand. He is a waiter at Red Lobster. One of his co-workers' daughters had only ever seen him at the lob. We were at a baby shower and the little girl approached my friend who was out of uniform. She tugs on his shirt and says, excuse me, but there is a man at my mom's work with an arm just like yours, do you know him? My friend looked at the little girl and said, that's me. It completely blew her mind. I have to. First time at a fancy restaurant for my at the time 4-year-old. A waiter who is black asks my daughter what she would like and she looks him square in the eye and says, are you a black man? He looked at me. I gave him an awkward smile. And after he cleared his throat and answered yes, she replied, I thought so. Waiter was cool. Zero fucks given. And he got a nice tip. Maybe 6 months later, we are being dropped off by the airport shuttle bus about to catch a flight. Our driver has a very large turban on. After he unloads our bags and we walk away towards the ticket counter, my kid asks my stepdad, where did the genie go, grandpa? Do we not get any wishes? Double quote. We were on vacation over spring break and my 7-year-old male cousin was home from school. He came up to the very messy room I was staying in and found a bra. This was his question. What is this? It doesn't even make sense. What do you do with this? It's a type of underwear. Oh. So do you put your pee-pee in the left side or the right side? He then attempted to put the bra on his crotch over his pants. I wasn't sure how to handle the situation, so I just left him up there. Not really an intellectual question, but a fun story anyway. A bunch of years ago, my father and I were in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. We were in a gallery that featured an enormous Renaissance painting of Diana. It showed her in repose with a bow and a deer she had just shot with an arrow. The deer was lying dead next to her. As my father and I were looking at other paintings in the same room, another father walked in with his son, who appeared to be about 6. The little boy immediately looked at the painting of Diana and without missing a beat, in his saddest sounding 6-year-old voice asked everyone in the room, what happened to Bambi? My dad and I still joke about it. I teach physics and math to kids. Questions of 12-year-olds. In my country, that's the age when kids get physics in school, are the best ones. I was trying to explain the velocity of light. Girl. Confused. Okay. That's all fine. But what is speed of dark then? Another child. A little bit older. He listened carefully while I explained the basics of geometric optics. Light going through a prism. Reflection. Refraction. Light dispersion, etc. Then he asked, how can I make a black and white mirror? Mindfuck. I used to ask my mom something along the lines of, how do I know that I'm me? And you're you. And we are real. And I'm not just imagining all of this, I'm not a robot or something. Obviously not in those words. But the same meaning. I would ask this all the time. Every time my mom would try to answer, I would cry and tell her no. And that she didn't understand. Eventually she just said, one day, when you get older, you'll learn and understand. And this totally pleased me. And I didn't ask that question again afterwards. Once when my son was 4, he and I were watching Sesame Street when the count came on. After a few minutes of watching him count, my son pointed to the TV and asked, "Is that God?" Double quote. After stifling my laughter and shock at the question, I told him it wasn't. This only started a discussion on who God was. My husband and I are agnostic atheists, but have been very careful to not sway our children's beliefs either way. We answer their questions honestly, and with as many facts as possible. We would answer questions about God and religion by saying, "Some people believe," and would leave personal opinions out of our explanations. This past year God questions would come up periodically. A couple months ago, my now 5-year-old son asked me, "Do you believe in God?" Still not wanting to sway him, I instead asked him if he did. He said, "No. It just doesn't make sense. But if God was real, I think he would look like the Count." Double quote. That's when I realized our approach was right for our kids. We're so proud that he came to his own conclusion by using reason and logic. I was at museum watching a planetarium show about the formation of the Earth as we know it, which included an overview of some of the asteroid collisions that took place. After the show, our host held a question and answer period about the subject. A little boy no older than 5 near the front row raised his hand and asked, "How many dinosaurs per minute did the asteroid kill?" Everyone in the room chuckled and awed, and our attendant gave him an answer that basically amounted to "Why? I don't know." Double quote. After I left the museum that day, however, it occurred to me that this little boy had asked a really astute question in his own child's English. What he was actually asking was, how quickly did that particular asteroid impact exterminate the dinosaurs? Brilliant question for his age. I now wish he'd been given the proper encouragement to ask more. I teach space science to elementary and middle school kids. After learning that the northern lights were primarily red and green, a 2nd grade girl amazed me by asking this question. Are Christmas colors red and green because Santa is up at the North Pole where there are lots of northern lights? Double quote. How rich is Santa? Seems like he's going through a hard time. Comma. Asked my friend's 3rd grade son. My friend immediately stopped his gambling habits. Amazing how even after 2 interventions his habit of gambling didn't end. But it only took few words from his son to get him to come to his senses. My friend was very pregnant, and also had a 1.5-year-old son who had just started talking. He was obsessed with balls, soccer balls, baseballs, tennis balls, especially basketballs, and was convinced that his mom had a basketball in her stomach. Every day he would point at her stomach and say basketball, over and over. One morning she was feeding him breakfast, and he repeats the basketball. Observation. Then he tilts his head, points at her boobs, and asks inquisitively, baseball? Brilliant. My sister, who went through a very painful divorce, has been broken up for a while now. She has 4 kids, the oldest being 7. And before the divorce went through, my niece saw my sister crying in her room and my niece told her, "He's gonna be sorry, Mom. You're a good person." I wish I could have been there to see it. I teared up over the phone. She also told my sister that what her dad did kills her heart. It's not a question, but I was blown away by how much she understood of the situation. Apparently when I was 4 years old, after watching an episode of the Magic School Bus, I asked my dad if there was less oxygen in the winter because the show explained how photosynthesis worked to produce oxygen. And I knew there were no leaves on the trees at winter. On a long-ass international flight, I heard a little boy who was probably 3 or 4 ask his dad how the airplane stays up and doesn't fall down. I'll be damned, that father must have been employed by the Jet Propulsion Laboratory or NASA, because for the next 10-15 minutes he literally educated the child on aerodynamics. Actually, while eavesdropping, I think I learned a thing or two. My grandmother loves telling this story when there is a family get-together. When I was 6 or so, my grandfather passed, and a week or 2 later my grandmother took my sister and me out to the cemetery. I was pretty quiet the whole time, and on the way back I was staring out the window and I sighed and said, "Nana, Did they bury Pop Pop standing up? She almost lost it. And explained to me that he was cremated. My reasoning for asking was because my grandfather was a pretty big man. 6 feet 4 inches 250 pounds. And I didn't see any signs of the ground being disturbed. Since I was 6 years old, the only way I knew of people being buried was in a coffin. TLDR. 6 years old me asked my grandmother if my grandfather was buried standing up. I learned about cremation. I brought home the first handgun I ever bought. I had just turned 21, was living with my parents for a few months before getting my own place, and my 9-year-old brother asked to see it, as it was the first real handgun he'd ever seen. It had no magazine in it and the chamber was clear, but I checked again just for safety's sake. I set the gun down on the case and stepped back to let me brother handle it, rather than pick it up and immediately start shooting imaginary bad guys or WE. He just stares at it for a second before asking me where the safety was. Outstanding little man. You've passed this test. When I was a kid I always asked questions. One of my favorites was, if there is a Mississippi then is there also a Mississippi? I even came up with questions at night and would wake up my parents to ask them. One night they woke me up and asked me questions such as, why is the sky blue? And all I could say is, I think somebody sucked my brains out while I was sleeping. Wasn't a question, but an observation my 4-year-old son made. Sitting around the dinner table and this look of euphoria washed across his face. I know that I exist because I can touch things. Double quote. He proceeded to poke and prod everything around him while repeating the phrase over and over again. It was an overwhelmingly beautiful moment to share with him. We have no idea as to the root of this original thought, but I like to think that was the moment I achieved ROI on all the philosophy classes I took in university.